It was fierce, feisty, full of fireworks. Last night's Democratic debate in Las Vegas really sets the tone for this next phase of the campaign. Gloves off. It was a brawl that ended with everyone maybe a little bloodied, but perhaps none more so than the new guy on stage, and that was former New York City Mayor Mike Bloomberg. I'm going to show you one of the exchanges now, courtesy of NBC News.
Democrats take a huge risk if we just substitute one arrogant billionaire for another.
We shouldn't have to choose between one candidate who wants to burn this party down and another candidate who wants to buy this party out.
I'm a philanthropist who didn't inherit his money, but made his money. And I'm spending that money to get rid of Donald Trump.
Mike Bloomberg owns more wealth than the bottom 125 million Americans. That's wrong. That's immoral.
So Mike Bloomberg's had a long political career, 3 terms as mayor. He's debated, but never in a format like that. It was his first, and for Americans and voters, their first look at the billionaire, unscripted and facing challenges from all of his fellow candidates. He really was in the crosshairs last night. As expected, Lindsay Duncombe is our senior Washington editor. She was watching very closely. Basically, simple question, how did he do, Lindsay?
Well, if you look at the analysis that is being made this morning, Heather, this was not a strong performance, not a strong introduction for Michael Bloomberg. It was pretty obvious that this situation, debating in this political forum, is not something that Michael Bloomberg has done in a long time. He looked awkward. In fact, Political Playbook, which is that email newsletter that everyone in Washington gets buzzed to their phones in the early morning, actually called Bloomberg's performance a belly flop. He did make apologies. He apologized about that controversial stop and frisk policy that targeted men of color in New York when he was a mayor. We knew that attack was coming. Another attack we knew was coming was about how Bloomberg and his company deals with women and controversial remarks he has made about women in the past. I want you to watch this exchange between Michael Bloomberg and Senator Elizabeth Warren about non-disclosure agreements and how his company has dealt with them in the past.
He has gotten some number of women, dozens, who knows, to sign non-disclosure agreements, both for sexual harassment and for gender discrimination in the workplace. So, Mr. Mayor, are you willing to release all of those women from those non-disclosure agreements so we can hear their side of the story?
We have a very few non-disclosure agreements.
How many is that?
Let me finish.
How many is that?
None of them accuse me of doing anything other than maybe they didn't like the joke I told. And let me just put,
Listen to that, Heather. What do you hear there? You hear booing, and it happened a couple of times during that exchange about Michael Bloomberg and women. A real sign that Bloomberg is not really responding in a way that is resonating with Democrats in the Me Too era. And there's another really strong takeaway from that same exchange. You heard the booing. What did you hear when Warren spoke? You heard really loud cheers. The consensus is that Elizabeth Warren had a great night, and this was a very different tactic for Warren. When we saw her debate in New Hampshire, she was really trying to put forward this idea as the unity candidate. But what she did in this case is not only did she go after Bloomberg, she had pithy, sharp one-liners against all of her opponents. What isn't clear is if Elizabeth Warren's strong debate performance will have any difference in terms of how voters see her and her electability. As we go into these Nevada caucuses, she's in this middle-of-the-road place in the polls.
So she needed a good performance because you're right, she has faltered in the first 2 states, surprisingly, given that she's been campaigning so energetically for such a long time and had been doing so well. So a good night for her. Bernie Sanders, he's been very critical of Bloomberg and saying he cannot buy the presidency with his billions. How did he do last night?
Bernie Sanders was Bernie. If you like Bernie, you like what you saw last night. And a lot of people really do like Bernie. There were some attacks on Bernie Sanders' policies, his Medicare for All. There was a discussion about democratic socialism and a real sense that if Bernie Sanders is the nominee, then going up against Trump will be tough because moderate Democrats were the key to the electoral success that Democrats had in 2018. Here's an exchange between Bernie Sanders and between Pete Buttigieg.
So what we are saying, Pete, is maybe it's a time for the working class of this country to have a little bit of power in Washington rather than your billionaire campaign contributors.
All right, look, first of all,
I know.
Look, my campaign is fueled by hundreds of thousands of contributors.
Including 26 billionaires.
And you hear Bernie talking about billionaires and millionaires and billionaires. That's the same message that he's had since 2016. It's the same message he's had since the beginning of his career. And it really is resonating with his supporters. Bernie Sanders is clearly the front runner. He is leading in national polls. He is leading in Nevada. He is leading in the Super Tuesday states. And part of the reason for that feistiness, that back and forth, you saw Amy Klobuchar go after Pete Buttigieg. The knives were really out. And the reason for that is a lot of people are concerned about what a Bernie Sanders nomination would mean for those electoral chances. And those who support Bernie, who think it's time for a revolution, their minds certainly would not have been changed by what they saw last night.
Well, it did not disappoint. So welcome to a new phase, Lindsay, and thank you very much for this morning. Our senior Washington editor, there's Lindsay Duncombe in the U.S. Capitol.